Good evening and welcome to See You at USC. I'm your Wednesday night host, Alexia Narcisse, and today I am here with two key players within the communications department of USC's Viterbi School of Engineering. Stay tuned. Welcome back to See You at USC. I'm your Wednesday night host, Alexia Narcisse, and today I am here with two key players within the communications department of USC Viterbi, Daniel Druhora and Amy Blumenthal. How are you both today?
Great.
Great to
Thank
be
you for
here.
coming. I have so many questions, but first and foremost, I broadly spoke of you being within the communications department of Viterbi, but specifically I noted that you're in production and you are within public relations.
Correct.
Do you want to elaborate a bit on your positions?
Sure. I'm the director of media relations at Viterbi, and I've been there about a year and a half.
Okay, and how about yourself?
So I'm a digital content producer, which means that anything that you see on the web, eventually I get to touch that. So whether it's magazine, whether it's video or audio or anything like that, yeah.
Okay, so I've got to ask you this, and specifically because of the fact that so many of us right now in our college career are kind of figuring out what are we going to do when we graduate? And there's this big pressure to graduate and get out into the real world and stick with that job. Or we think that the first thing that we pick is what we're going to do for the rest of our life. So what were both of your experiences coming out of undergrad and ending up where you are now?
I can speak first. I could say that first I did an undergraduate in social sciences. I thought I was going a totally different route, thought I was going to law school, thought I was going to teaching. I did teach for a while in public schools in New York City, and I ended up working in investor relations for big companies.
So you took
I took a totally different route, and here at USC I get to combine interest in public relations and messaging as well as my interest in education. So it's a long route to get there, but it's not always the route that you think you're going to go.
Wow, and did you foresee that in any way? Was there a moment that you said, maybe I'll go into something engineering based, or?
It's not so much the engineering, it's the storytelling and finding the right team. I think it's finding where you're comfortable. I worked at the business school as well, and I think it's like if you're a smart person and you're able to understand different subject matters and you're curious, I think that's what you put into any job. So that's what I would think that undergraduates should do.
Of course. And how about yourself?
So yeah, my story's all over the place. I wanted to work for the United Nations. I wanted to work for the State Department. I wanted to do something international because I always thought like you have to change the world in some way. You have to leave it better than what you found it. So I went to University of Washington in Seattle, studied international relations. My first job getting out of there was working for a biotech firm in Europe. I did a lot of marketing. So during that time, I started making a documentary film, actually about my late grandfather, who was a professor and passed away. And during communism, he was arrested because of the stuff that he wrote, actually. Okay. So I wanted to do a film about him, and I fell in love with the medium. Came back to the States and applied to only one school, the USC School of Cinematic Arts.
Of course.
And I said if this was going to be my one shot, and I got in and got involved in screenwriting and storytelling, and worked for Warner Brothers for a year and started writing my own scripts. So after that, I just, anything that has to do with storytelling, I'm really attracted to.
Now, I noticed that you started your own production company.
Yes.
Okay. And
yes,
how has
I did,
that been? What has that been like? Because you're essentially an entrepreneur as much as you are an employee of Viterbi.
Right. So it's not like we don't give up our passions. I think USC is a great place for that, where they encourage you to continue on your passion and continue to do what it is that you want to do. And so yeah, I have a production company that I run with a few people that do screenwriting and directing and producing. Yeah, so I'm still writing scripts basically, even from here, from USC.
That's great. Now, speaking of passions, you guys have been working on a podcast for quite a while. And I listened to maybe 1 or 2 episodes, and you could just tell in listening to it that this was something that was more than just a day-to-day kind of let me get it done podcast. Everything had a sentiment to it or meaning to it. And listening to it, it was more than just hearing about science or hearing about technology. It was actually, as we talked about prior, a human story. There was some sort of essence to it that made me and so many other students who will hopefully begin watching if they haven't started yet, want to become engaged with these podcasts. How did that come about?
Dan, you should take this one.
So are you asking how we created the podcast?
Without a doubt. And what did you have in mind when you were doing that?
So we were looking at how to tell the stories of the research and the people behind it. What was the best medium for that? We were already doing video, we were already writing articles, we were writing a great magazine that was an award-winning magazine that we had written for many years, published at USC Viterbi. And we said there's a missing link here, there's something we're not doing and we'd like to tap into, and that was podcasts, but more of like narrative storytelling podcast, where it's more like an audio documentary rather than just an interview. So we wanted to tell the story of the great research that was happening at Viterbi and the people behind it. And it wasn't like somebody called us and said, you have to do a podcast. We just, with the resources we had, we put a team together and we did our first episode.
Wow.
And I think it's also very different. So normally, I do public relations, so sometimes people in school are learning about press releases, and sometimes people do that and sort of thing. And this is a much more emotional, engaging project than you're writing something straight. So for me, it's something very different. And so Daniel got me kind of hooked into it because he needed a host or co-host. And so I got hooked into it. But then you get really involved, which is very opposite. With PR, you have to kind of keep an emotional distance. But I think the difference with this and why we think it's successful is because people get engaged because it is human, it is emotional. And I mean, Dan laughs. So when I get engaged in a story, I usually start to tear up a little bit. And it's
so
like tipping point.
It is interesting to say that basically there's something Amy and I both have in common that we haven't talked about, which is at one point in our lives we were both teachers. So when I was a grad student here at USC, I was teaching in Chinatown. I was teaching writing and test prep, and I was teaching to high school students. And Amy, you were a teacher.
I taught middle school and high school.
Wow.
Social studies.
Education never ends, though.
Does it?
Right. So, but also storytelling is also a form of teaching.
Yeah.
And I think that we both connected in that we knew we wanted to inform people, but in a way that'll leave an impression, whether that's an emotional impression or something that people will remember, like, oh my God, I can't believe that they're doing that at USC. And that's going to change the world in some way.
Was there any episode from Escape Velocity that really hit home for you guys?
Different for me than for Dan. So the most recent one we did, Cancer in the Time of Algorithms, which is Dan's title, which is great. The most recent one, we interviewed someone who was a Caltech researcher, and she was a computational biologist, and she realized that, she looked at genes and genomic expression in part of her career, and she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And basically ovarian cancer is, there's about 22,000 people who are diagnosed per year who get ovarian cancer, and or women who get it. And when it's diagnosed, it's usually at late stage. So when we met with her, it was just an odd day where we met with this woman, and we were wearing mirror outfits. It was very strange, and it hit me personally. Like, this could be me, this could be my friends, and I've had friends who they've have the BRCA gene, which means that they have an 85% chance of getting breast or ovarian cancer. So to me, it was a very personal story to begin with. And it was a personal story, the way she connected with one of the USC researchers who's at our Information Science Institute. And his job was to help her create a tool that could help her analyze the data. And maybe you want to go into a little more about that one, I don't know. But that's not necessarily what affected you in the same way.
Yeah, I was really, what brought me into this story, this particular story. Obviously, I'm fascinated by this woman's fight to save her own life, using what she knows and her training. I was also fascinated by the friendship that she had developed with a complete stranger, a researcher from USC-ISI, who was basically a data scientist, a former physicist. They were both they both connected because they were both former physicists, and I love that friendship element, like how somebody could be so like quickly connected with someone, and then start this journey on trying to save her life. And what really fascinated me is that they were meeting not in labs or in big research institutions. They were meeting in coffee shops. They were texting the research over their phones. It was like
personal.
It was very personal, yeah. And I wanted to tell that story of friendship. I wanted that to be highlighted in some way as well. That they lifted each other up, like he was telling her physicist jokes, and just to lift her spirits. And I really loved that friendship element.
Now, when you guys get a story like that, it's clearly something that's emotional, and it's difficult to process because not only are you internalizing all of this information at once, but you're also having to flip it out and push out a product to the general public. Is there a certain thing that you start with so that you can, or do you even ever feel like the project is really done with something like that?
I'm going to go back to what you said. I think it's like, if it hits you on an emotional level, it can't just be intellectual, it can't just be informational. It has to also be engaging. It has to be transformational. Like we're looking for stories that change something. They're like game changers. Yeah. To me, the way, for instance, this story that we did with Shirley Pepke and Greg Versteeg from ISI, it was just the fact that they were doing something so incredible that right now is part of the country's effort to fight cancers, like the new war on cancer that was declared by President Biden with the cancer moonshot. And these two people were at the forefront of it and using what they had, the tools that they had developed. Their resources. So to me, it's like I'm inspired by people who seem like they're not that important, but they do like amazing things. I had this question of like, how did penicillin get discovered? How did insulin get discovered? It was discovered by accident. If you look at it that way, a lot of things.
Mistakes.
Yeah, these golden mistakes, and I love the fact that people can collaborate and there are no silos. You know, in a university, that's what you want to see. That people cross boundaries. That they go and they start working with people that are in completely different fields. And they learn from each other, and they end up coming with something that's going to transform.
And the interesting thing is also it's finding the story. So for this particular story, originally we started off because a story about this same researcher at ISI, Greg. His research was with eHarmony. And
yes, that's
right.
So
originally we're talking about his job is matching individuals who are looking for love. And then the next thing is he's matching someone who's looking for the cancer treatment that's going to save her life.
Oh, wow.
So to me, I think the beauty of any of these stories, or whether it's a podcast or not, what I like about Dan's ability is he's able to, find the story in something really small that maybe someone else doesn't see, and that's kind of what attracted me to working on this particular project, whether it's this podcast or another. And I think also, I would just say that anybody looking for those kind of stories, I think there's also the underdog piece. Also, it's not a victim, but kind of the unspoken story that no one found,
the unsung hero,
right? And to resurrect that.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because you two, to me, are the unsung heroes. And you mentioned earlier 2 people using the resources that they have to create change, and that's exactly what you both do. So when we come back from the break, we're going to speak more about these changes that you two create and how you all can become more involved in watching their podcast, and of course, in using the resources that you have to create change. Welcome back to the CU at USC. I'm your Wednesday night host, Alexia Narcisse, and we are back for our second half. I'm here with Daniel Druhora and Amy Blumenthal, who are both key players within the communications at USC Viterbi School, and we just talked about their podcast and a little bit about, well, these two people here don't realize how much of heroes they actually are. So we're going to talk more about what kind of an impact they have had within science and technology and really storytelling and communicating. So, how are you guys today? We're back again.
Thank you.
Great.
So I want to know a little bit more about how the podcast works, what that format is, and how you have been able to make this something that's so much bigger than just talking into a microphone and blasting it onto the internet.
Okay. So I would say, each podcast is different in terms of how, like, sourcing the story. If one of us finds a lead, then we're telling the other. So I think first of all, it's sourcing it and recording an interview. And sometimes it's Daniel doing it. Sometimes, I mean, for the most part, Daniel's involved in most of the recording pieces. And then it depends on who's going to kind of order it, because even though the podcast may be linear, they don't come that way. So you have to slice and dice it in many different ways.
Okay.
So it really is a team effort, and I do want to give credit to the student workers that we have.
Yes.
They're just fantastic students from Thornton School of Music. We have Will Brumbach, Simone Atteni, who's from Italy, great guitarist. Again, Will Brumbach composes all our music, the theme music. So, and then we have also student contributors that are part of the writing team. We have Tiana Lowe, we have Aliyah Rahman, we have also our other bigger team, Adam Smith, Michael Chung, Michelle Henry, Elizabeth Bain, all the people who are on our team, and they all pitch ideas. Mark Ballin, who's a former LA Times reporter, and so these are people who go out and get leads and come and tell us, like, I stumbled upon a great story, and we talk about the story, whether or not it can be, whether it can fit in that format. There's a few things we look for. So one of the things we look for is, for instance, is the person accessible? Can we go to them? Can we interview them? How are they? Because some people just don't want to be recorded, or they completely shut off when they have a microphone pointed at them. And so we want people that also can tell their story and be able to reach out to a bigger audience. That's a big piece. We're also looking for that emotional connection. Then basically, once we figure out a story and we were able to lock down someone, then we go and start production, and we have to figure out, like, what are we going to do? For instance, is this going to be something that we want them to run with themselves? Like, are they going to be able to record themselves walking around, telling the story? We just stumbled upon a great veteran story today, a student who came from a very poor community, didn't think he was ever going to make it to college, not USC necessarily.
And everyone in his life told him he couldn't get there.
Right, including his high school counselors.
And community college counselor too.
Community college counselors.
Discouraged him from applying to USC.
Wow.
So we were looking for veteran day stories, and we stumbled upon him.
Yeah.
And he came and told us his story, how he ended up in the Navy, how he went to overseas, Japan.
So we jumped around and did a lot.
Yeah, and at that moment, we were, both of us looking at each other and thinking, like, of course, this is a podcast story. And how about giving this guy, basically, giving him a microphone and letting him journal his day. I want him to go back to that high school, for instance, talk to his high school counselor. I want him to address the students that were in his position, 6-7 years ago, and we're being told the same thing, like, military is the only option for you, or you could become a mechanic, or
air conditioning
technician.
Yeah.
Right.
But he knew that there was something beyond that, and to me, that's a story. I mean, he told us of moments of, like, not being able to afford certain things that are sort of rites of passage.
Right. He couldn't ask his mom for $20 to go to the dance, for instance.
Wow.
And that was like, okay, I want him to talk to his mom. I want to hear that interaction. I want to hear the sounds of the kitchen. I want to hear them talk in Spanish.
So
I
you're
want to
giving
be
us
there.
a real podcast experience.
Right.
That's not just a voiceover, but there's sound, there's so much going on.
It's the world of the people. I don't think you can tell a story about someone without welcoming the audience into their world.
I think it's also like Dan brings like a cinematic approach to it, and like when we're talking to someone and there's something unique, he's like, "This is gold," and it's the gold is
education.
Yeah, it's the gold. It's the gold of like as this is the cardinal, but no, but it's gold in terms of if someone could play music. How can we bring it into this person as a full human being and the world that they are in? So kind of a 360 approach, I guess, right?
Yeah, it is really. I love sound. To me, sound is a medium to tell stories. I think they're just as visual. They say that the eyes are a window to a person's soul. I think the ears are the window to a person's mind. And like being able to open up the mind, but also the voice. Like I think you look at a person's eyes and a face, but then you also hear their voice, and you remember voices. I recall voices. If I hear my mom's voice or if I hear a special friend's voice, I recognize that.
Right.
So to me, sound plays an important emotional role, not just in our ability to empathize with each other, but also our development as human beings. Like I think we become educated with sound.
It also just brings you back in time. I mean, all of us probably can remember our favorite song. Like you can remember the words to your favorite song from when you were 13. So it's.
Yeah.
Do you guys feel like when you're creating those podcasts, you're looking for these specific sounds? And in a way, does it sometimes feel like you're artificially making them, or do they just come to you?
No, we have an idea, right? Like sometimes we're like, oh, how are we going to do this? But like for instance, Amy, when we were interviewing Shirley Pepke,
right,
and we had wrapped up the entire interview and we were getting ready to go, and as I was walking out, I saw that there was a violin on the piano, and I said, "Who plays the violin?" And she said, "She did." I was looking at Will. I was looking at Amy. We all understood each other.
You guys are
Okay,
like,
we're not done yet. We're gonna get this. And it was a great moment in that interview where she stopped and played the violin.
And I think it's also the important part is like it's not like an exploitive thing. I think it's something that this is something she does well. This was actually part of her treatment for herself. So I think in moments when she was under chemotherapy, she would play the violin. So to us, it's also, it's again, you don't want someone to feel like the subject, like you're taking from them. How are they part of it, and what can they show off that's about them?
Or that you're imposing something.
Yeah.
And I think I asked that because we see so commonly, I was a journalism major for a while, I actually still am, but I think it's now just to graduate. And I've been finding that when I'm piecing together different stories, at some point it becomes work. It becomes monotonous, and it's me piecing natural sound together, and it's no longer as much of a storytelling experience. But from what it sounds like, you guys keep it streamlined on being a storyline experience, an emotional experience, and I'm wondering how you're able to, with all these distractions and with all this sound where you go, okay, we could just throw that in because we need 3 seconds of audio clip, how you're able to really make that an experience.
I would say for me, it's like, I know I'm making, if I do this and I do it well, with this one I knew I'm going to change someone's life. Someone is going to hear this and someone is going to share it, and maybe someone else will find out about this kind of treatment. Or for example, one that we did about a professor who watched Neil Armstrong from his couch walk on the moon, and it inspired him to come to, not because he actually wanted to become an astronaut or become a rocket scientist and come to USC, not knowing that Neil Armstrong was an alum. And so those moments, you feel like there's somebody out there who has a big dream, and no matter what, maybe they don't want to be a rocket scientist, but this is going to inspire them. Like, someone did that in a place, this guy did crazy things to get here. So knowing that if there's a struggle involved, someone else is experiencing maybe not the same thing, and I think that's worth it. I think the monotony, if there is some, anyone who has to go through something and listen to something 10 times, 20 times, I think it's worth it.
And to answer your question, we don't throw spaghetti at the wall hoping it sticks. We want something to be organic to the story. So it's more about it's not how much you can do to embellish, but what you can take away to leave the truth there, to leave the story intact. Sometimes it's not about what you add, but what you take away, and what you got to let the person breathe. You want to hear their breath. You want to hear them talk to you. You want to hear the sounds of their home.
And I think that's also a really important point, because you have to be comfortable with stuff that's uncomfortable. When someone breaks down crying, I'm the first to be like, oh my God. And I like ruined a lot of the recording because I'm like, this person's crying. What do I do? So you have to kind of be like, ask the questions that are sometimes uncomfortable and then deal with that discomfort and silence sometimes.
Okay, now before we close, I just have to ask, do you guys have any idea of where you see your podcast continuing to go, or is it going to come to a close at some point, or will this be something lifelong where you'll pass it on to your kids and there'll be little Dan and Amy's running a podcast?
When we first started this and we said we were going to be the next Serial of engineering and science, I want the people that listen to Serial, like the 4 million people that download Serial, to tune into things like this, to find science engineering stories transformative. There are powerful stories in science and engineering as well. So we're hoping to just be able to get it syndicated. We're hoping just to be able to grow the podcast, to have more and more listeners. We want it to be like this thing was born here at USC and it reached beyond.
And how about you? Same thing?
I'd say same, but I think hopefully, I also think we hope also other media will pick it up. I mean, that's kind of my job, is also to extend it. So, and like I said, if it inspires one person, helps one person's treatment, that's enough for me.
All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today and for staying with us and for giving us so much knowledge. For those of you who want to watch their podcast, you can go online. We put up the graphic a bit earlier. You can check that out. Thank you all so much and have a great night.
You're watching Trojan Vision. For more of your favorite shows, check us out at trojanvision.com and like us on Facebook.
When my friend said she was into it, I was scared.
I heard about it freshman year, but I totally avoided it.
She'd never really gotten involved in stuff like this before.